Imagine a quiet Minneapolis neighborhood suddenly thrust onto the national stage. Not for a celebration, not for progress, but for a moment that ignited outrage, debate, and massive protests across the United States. That's where we are today, after the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good by a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE agent during a federal operation in Minneapolis on January 7th, 2026. Good, a U.S. citizen and mother of three, was reportedly sitting in her vehicle at the scene when the encounter escalated. Federal authorities, including the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, quickly asserted that the ICE agent, identified later as Jonathan Ross, acted in self-defense during an operation they called part of the agency's largest enforcement effort in Minnesota. But here's where the story gets tense. Different sources and videos paint conflicting pictures of what actually happened in those crucial seconds before the fatal shots were fired. Some video footage released by the Department of Homeland Security appears to show Good's car slowly moving away from the ICE agent, even as other eyewitnesses maintain she posed no threat. This immediate dispute over facts has become the central flashpoint in the ongoing national conversation. What the government says. From the federal government's perspective, the agent's actions were justified under policy. DHS described the situation as the agent fearing for his life, claiming that Good weaponized her vehicle, a characterization that DHS officials have stood by publicly. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem went as far as calling it an act of domestic terrorism, using language that instantly drew criticism from local leaders and commentators alike. Within hours, high-ranking officials including President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance publicly defended the agent and asserted the shooting was justified, even as footage shared by federal sources showed no obvious sign of the officer being struck by a vehicle. This rapid defense by the administration added fuel to the fire, raising questions about presumption of innocence versus assumptions of guilt even before a complete investigation is conducted. What local leaders and critics say. On the other side of this divide, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey called the federal narrative bulls and demanded that ICE leave the city entirely, accusing the agency of making Minneapolis less safe rather than protecting it. Critics argue that the footage and eyewitness reports contradict federal claims that Good posed a deadly threat. Some local leaders have openly questioned why state law enforcement wasn't involved sooner, arguing that the FBI's control over the investigation may hinder transparency and accountability. Protesters who gathered in Minneapolis and in cities across the United States, including New York, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Boston, echoed those sentiments, calling for accountability, justice for Good, and even dismantling ICE entirely. Many of the thousands in attendance carried signs that read "Justice for Renee Good" and "ICE out for Good." These demonstrations, while largely peaceful, reflect a deep national divide over immigration enforcement and the perceived role of federal agencies in local communities. Some protests did see clashes with police, declarations of unlawful assembly, and a small number of arrests, a reminder that when peaceful activism meets deep emotion, tensions can escalate quickly. A nation responds, compassion, anger, and calls for change. Beyond protests and political statements, the human impact of this tragedy has resonated deeply. Community groups, churches, and immigrant advocacy organizations have organized vigils, services of lament and hope, and spaces for collective grieving, underscoring how traumatic such events can be for ordinary families, especially those already fearful of immigration enforcement. Meanwhile, certain conservative figures and donors have rallied around the ICE agent. A GoFundMe campaign supporting Ross's legal defense has drawn hundreds of thousands of dollars, showing that this event is not only polarizing, but also symbolic for people on all sides of the national immigration debate. Consequences and bigger questions for the future. So what happens next? First, the investigation is ongoing. Because the shooting involved a federal agent, the FBI has taken the lead, a decision that has sparked controversy and raised legal questions about federal versus state jurisdiction. Some legal experts have warned that federal control might limit transparency and hinder a full accounting of events unless state officials can gain access to evidence. Second, the federal response has already included plans to send hundreds more officers to Minnesota, according to DHS, which argues this is necessary to support federal agents amid growing protests. Critics fear this will only escalate tensions further, possibly leading to more clashes and distrust between communities and law enforcement. Third, the way this event is discussed in media and politics could shape public trust long after the immediate story fades. When government leaders publicly label people as domestic terrorists before any conviction, or when local officials dismiss federal accounts as propaganda, it fuels wider polarization and undermines confidence in institutions meant to protect society. Unbiased investigations may become harder to conduct in such a climate. Finally, the human cost cannot be ignored. A mother of 3 is dead. Families are grieving, communities are anxious, and a national debate has taken on deeply personal meaning for millions. This moment in Minneapolis could set precedents for how immigration enforcement is conducted and how federal authority is balanced with local rights and citizens' dignity. Final thoughts. This tragic incident in Minneapolis isn't just about one shooting. It's about how America navigates law enforcement, immigration policy, civil liberties, and community trust. It's about whether the public can rely on fair investigations, transparent leadership, and truthful narratives, even when events are politically charged. One thing is clear. This moment has sparked conversation, debate, and activism from coast to coast. And whether you stand with or against the actions taken, the questions raised here will likely stay in national headlines for a long time.